Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to another video. So we have finally made it to the texturing portion. Before we begin, there's a couple of things that we have to do. We got to prep our mesh and get it ready to bake. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and take our foliage and our pages that we worked on. We're just going to go ahead and hide them for now. So I went ahead and did this really quick, but I want to show you what I did because as you can see, I have my Arcane Chest working file down here, and I've went ahead, all of these pieces, they used to say, Arcane Wood pieces underscore low. As you can see, they no longer have the underscore low next to any of the names, and you can see that these pieces down here do. Now you're probably asking, what's the point of having an additional group with all of these pieces named here? Well, that's because when we're in Substance Painter doesn't like to have all of these names, these polygroup surface names under here if you're going to be using the name by feature, which in our case today, we actually probably won't use that. We might, but I'm just going to show you that anyway. This is just, for me, one of the cleanest ways I like to work, because if you can recall that all of our high polys, when we were exporting them out of ZBrush, they all have the exact same naming convention match. So if we wanted to go ahead and actually take advantage of that, this is basically what you'd have to do. So I'm just kind of showing you a different way that you can work. So all I've basically done is I basically just took each of these and I duplicated them, and then I just went one by one and I just combined them, and then I renamed them. And once I renamed all of them, I stuck them inside of the group called Arcane Chest Working, just like this. So that's all that's been done. No meshes have actually been changed at all, so just so that we're all up to date on that. Okay, and once you have all these pieces all grouped up, basically I would just end up taking them from here, and I created a new folder called Working Assets, and I just went ahead and put this in here, and I called it Arcane Chest Working. So you'll probably realize that we haven't duplicated any of the rest of these assets over just yet, and there's a reason for that, and that's because when you're trying to bake, you don't want to have a whole bunch of additional pieces that you've duplicated over, because then it kind of becomes pretty difficult to figure out which was the original piece that's being baked off of. For example, if I took one of these bottles here and I duplicated it across, and let's say I baked and I start running into a lot of issues, maybe I've got some like ambient occlusion or normal map issues on it, well, it's can be pretty difficult to kind of remember, which asset you need to delete, because the high poly meshes that I have are all referencing all the pieces that are currently in this scene. So again, another example would be, I wouldn't want to take a bunch of these and start duplicating them around, because if I did that, then essentially I'm going to really easily lose track of which pieces were the original three. So it's just good to keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and head it into Substance Painter. So I have a brand new Substance Painter scene opened up here. So let's go ahead and go up to File, go to New, and I'm just using this ASM PBR Metallic Roughness for the starter assets. This is just like the default. And I'm going to go ahead and just leave the 1K setting here. We can change that later. And for our low poly file, let's go ahead and go into our Working Assets folder, grab our low poly, go ahead and hit OK. All right, so everything loaded up, looks like it's nice and neat. So next, what we can go ahead and do, this is something that I personally like to do. I just like to type in and rename this and do Arcane Chest 01. All right, and then I usually like to go ahead and just delete this layer because we're not gonna end up using that right now. So next, what we can do, if we come over here to this side, we can see our Bake Mesh Maps. So let's go ahead and open that up. Okay, so for our output size, since we did plan on doing a 4K map, we're going to want to make sure that this is set to 4096. And since we're not going to be needing an ID map, we can go ahead and turn that off. All right, so let's go ahead and let's open up all of our high poly files that we had. Okay, so I'm just going to basically take all of these at once. I'm going to go ahead and open them in here. So you'll see that they're all basically all loaded in here. Now we're actually not going to be using the match by name like I thought we would, just because I don't actually think it's going to be necessary in our case. But if we do find that we need to use that, then we can always do that, and I can show you the difference between those two. So we're just going to leave all the settings the same. So let's go ahead and actually look at our anti-aliasing, and we can go ahead and set this up to 8. There's really no reason why you wouldn't want to set this to 8. This is just going to make the normal map and basically all these maps over here nice and sharp and crisp. If not, it's going to look kind of scraggly, and you don't really want that. The only reason I would say don't use this is if your computer cannot handle it, because it is a little bit taxing on it, but for the most part it should be fine. Okay, so the other settings that we can look at really quick is this self-occlusion and ignore backface. So the reason why you would want to actually set this to only same mesh name is if you didn't want the meshes to be basically baked into one another. So if you look over here, you see these bottles right here, you're gonna see this in a little bit. Basically, this desk, this wooden desk part right here, because they're so close, some of the normal map information will definitely be baked onto the actual mesh. So essentially, that's what you would want to have turned on if you didn't want that to happen. But I'll kind of show you, how you can kind of get around that without, having to turn this on. Because the unfortunate thing is that with the actual normal map settings for the match by name on this setting here, it can be kind of finicky. If you have geometry that you're using that's, really, really high, or maybe you have some, stray verts somewhere, Substance Painter does not like that. So it'll usually come up with a warning. So that's why, sometimes you can get away with using the default setting here. So there's actually nothing that I really touch after that. I really don't touch any of the settings on here. I think for the most part, they're pretty much good to go right out of the box. So before I bake, actually, I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of show you, I did a test earlier, just to kind of show you the difference between the two settings for the ambient occlusion. So basically on the left here, we have that this is the default settings, nothing's been touched. And then we have AO, I should make this matched by name. And you can see kind of the difference here. So you see this jar down here compared to this one. So basically what this is doing is it's looking at all the meshes, and on this side, it's just baking the AO into all of the objects that are touching each other because we have those settings turned off. And with this, you can see, we have like the rope, some of the stones up here, and then we have like the jar down here, and we don't have any ambient occlusion baked onto them. They're separate meshes. And the reason why you'd want to use something like this is, maybe you might want to actually take this jar and, scatter it around the scene. Maybe you wanted to, reuse some of the assets. So again, this is probably not going to be something that we're going to take advantage of in our scene here. So it's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bake these maps. All right, so I have all of my baked maps ready to go, and it looks like for the most part, it actually did quite a good job here. Now, I have my textures being displayed at a resolution of 1K, so that's not really going to be super useful for us because we want to see, the exact resolution that we want. So let's go ahead and go up to size up here, and let's change this to 4K. That's looking a lot better. So you'll notice right away that there is a couple of things that stand out, and one of them being down here. So you can kind of see, if I go ahead and highlight this here. So right now what happened was that since this mesh here and the little string are so close together that it basically just projected the string onto the wood. So now the normal bake is basically on here, which we don't really want. So there is actually a manual way that you can do this. I used to always actually use Photoshop, so I'm actually really thankful that I don't have to anymore because that was quite time consuming. Let's just kind of go around here and see if there's anything else that we might have missed. I mean, I think for the most part, everything looks pretty good. Not really too concerned with anything. I think there's a little bit of normal map issue up here. See how this kind of got baked onto the edge right across there? And it looks like it did just a little bit right here as well. Not a really big deal. So that's not really a big deal to me up here, but we can always fix that. So let's go over a manual way that we can go about painting this little normal map issue out really quick here. So let's first just go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and just turn off this normal map up here. Essentially, all these maps up here that we just baked, these in this position right here are considered to be uneditable, which means we can't really do anything to them at this point. So let's just go ahead and we're going to create a fill layer right here. And I'm just going to call this normal map bake. And then let's go down to the properties and let's turn everything off except for the normal here at the end. And where it says normal here, let's go ahead and put in the normal map that we baked. Okay, so once we have the normal map in here, this is basically doing the exact same thing that it's doing up here. But in this case, now that it's basically in our layer stack, we can actually go ahead and sort of edit, but we want to make sure that we do it in a non-destructive way because this is still our baked normal map that we want. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is let's go ahead and create a paint layer here, and we can call this normal map edits. And let's do something else. Let's actually make this a little bit easier on ourselves. That way we're not trying to paint over on top of this little string here. Let's go ahead and make this into 2D and 3D. So this looks like the culprit right up here. Okay, so now that we have the normal map edits created, we can actually just go down and let's just go ahead and toggle everything off except for our normal map. Now, we still have one more thing to do because as you can see, as I'm painting here, nothing's happening. So let's go up to our layer stack and we'll change from base color to normal. And we'll want to make sure we go and change this to normal at the top here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and try and give that a whirl. So it's pretty cool, right? So you can kind of just go through and basically what this is doing, if you actually look at the normal map color, so this color down here is basically, this is what like the default normal map color is. So anywhere that you see this purple is basically what this color is. So you'll notice that I could actually, if I wanted to, go through and paint out some of the baked normal map information. Now we obviously don't want to do that, so we just kind of want to stick to painting out all of these areas right here that it's kind of on top of. Just like that. Okay, so you'll notice that, we do have this base normal color here, which is good. But what about if we try to paint in here? Now, obviously we can't because it starts to paint in a different color, and that's going to actually affect the normal map quite a bit. Okay, so one thing that you can do is you can actually come up to here and use this eyedropper, and we're just going to go ahead and select this purple color here, and then we can just kind of brush our way through with that. Same with if we want to go ahead and paint on the green, we can just go ahead and paint that. So again, if I wasn't doing this method that I'm currently doing, I would technically be doing the same thing inside of Photoshop. And Photoshop is just going to take a lot longer just because you then have to go and search for everything where, in my case, we can just kind of go through our map and just kind of go around and look at everything. Okay, so now we can see that that looks all nice and cleaned up. Not too bad. Now again, you can kind of see now we have another issue, right? Because it looks like it's still here, but actually this is the ambient occlusion that we're now seeing. So we could actually go ahead and do the same thing for this if we wanted to in a manual way. Now again, I should mention that to avoid doing any of this, this is where you'd want to go ahead and set up your naming conventions so it would properly work. But like I said, this is pretty much, it's not a big deal to have to go and clean up a little bit every once in a while. So we're going to basically be doing the exact same thing that we did, except we're going to be using our ambient occlusion map this time. So let's go ahead and get rid of the ambient occlusion up here. And we're going to go ahead and create a new fill layer and call this AO Bake. And you'll notice that you don't see any option right here for AO, and that's because by default, Substance Painter does not have that available. So we're going to just go up to the top here, where under our channels, and we'll hit this plus button, and we'll just select Ambient Occlusion. So now you'll see that that opened up a little AO tab. So let's just go ahead and turn that on and turn everything else off. And just like before, we're going to click on this little button here, and we're going to go ahead and search for our Ambient Occlusion, and we're going to turn that on. So now you'll see that that just popped right back into here. Okay, so next, just like before, we're going to go ahead and let's go up to our layers, turn on Ambient Occlusion right here, and let's go ahead and create a new paint layer. And we're going to call it AO Bake Edits. And of course, we're going to want to make sure that our paint layer is not being affected by the normal, and it'll be affected by the AO. So now we could just go in and start painting this out, but you can see that this color here is probably not going to work because it's just standing out too much. So just like before, we can go ahead and just take the eyedrop tool, just kind of click next to it, make our brush a bit bigger, and we can just kind of paint out some of this. Now the AO is a little bit more finicky than the normal map just because the AO kind of has more of a spread in the color values than the normal map does. So if that's the case, you can basically just come up here onto your brush settings and you can do some stroke opacity and flow adjustments. So I'm just going to bring the stroke opacity down quite a bit and essentially just grab this color again and just kind of, instead of, you know, being fairly aggressive with it, I'll just kind of dot it down every once in a while. That way it's not, you know, a super extreme contrast of color. And I'm just going to come over here and do the same. Okay, so now that that's all done, you can kind of go ahead and see the difference that that made just by going in and sort of manually painting that out. So not too bad of a job. It actually is looking pretty good. So again, if you see any other areas that, you know, you want to just sort of paint out and fix, you are more than welcome to do that. In this case, I will probably go ahead and paint some of this out just because that is something that is a pretty obvious mark. You may not see it super well when it comes time to start texturing, but I think that, you know, just this is something that, you know, you want to catch, right? In the professional world, if you don't catch something, I guarantee that someone probably will catch it as well. So if we just kind of go back down and we search for where that bottle is. Okay, so it looks like I found it over here. All right, so let's go ahead and just take a look. Let's go to our normal map edits again. And let's just kind of look at what we can do here. If I just start to go through here and paint out, I think this is the other side. So this little sliver right here, if we just kind of go through, let's get our eyedropper and just kind of get that normal color back. And we'll just go through and we'll just kind of paint that out a little bit. There's nothing wrong with actually using your brush on the actual 3D side of things, but you do run into the issue of accidentally painting on top of something that you didn't mean to. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so that is looking much, much better. So in case you didn't know, to cycle through, you can hit C to cycle through those maps, or you could hit B to cycle through your baked mesh maps. But I'm actually a pretty big fan of how all this turned out. So I think I want to keep this nice and organized. So let's go ahead and just select all of these and we'll create a new folder. And we're just going to call this Baked Maps Edits. Okay, so now everything can stay nice and organized. When you are at this stage of the process, you want to make sure you go ahead and start to save it. Okay, so now that everything looks really good to go, this is the stage where I would go ahead and start to reassemble my mesh back inside of Maya, and then we can bring it back into Substance Painter. That way we can just sort of start to see everything in its full glory and in the context that we need to see it in. So let's go ahead and head back into Maya for a little bit. Okay, so since this is basically our working file and it's labeled as such, we don't really want to touch this because this will be basically the mesh that we come back to if we ever need to make any sort of adjustments. So essentially what we can do at this stage, if you want to, this is totally optional. What I like to do is I like to basically take all these meshes, I'm going to duplicate them, and then I'm just going to regroup them. And I'm going to go ahead and just call this Arcane Chest Complete. So this asset will actually be the final asset that goes inside of Substance Painter, and it's also going to be our final asset that goes inside of Unreal Engine. So at this stage, there's really not too much to explain. I'm basically going to go through while looking at the concept and probably looking back at our original mesh. I'm just going to go through and start to place all these meshes back to their original spots and duplicate them all over. That way we are going to be good to go and get this low poly all wrapped up and completed. So I will see you in just a little bit. Alright, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back. So as you can see, we have basically gone through and I've duplicated everything and basically put all of the objects back to where they originally belonged. And I also went through and scattered a bunch of the opal stones around and basically just kind of tidied everything up. And hopefully I didn't miss anything. If I do, I usually catch that in the texturing phase if there's anything that's, missing from being duplicated or anything. So yeah, not too bad. One of the things that I forgot to mention off the top is that when I started, I basically just wanted to take the original working file that we had, and all I did was basically just, once I had that selected, you can come over here to layers and then just do create layer from selected, and then from there all I did was go through and turn this little toggle on so that way it says T, and you can basically see an outline of the existing object. And that was really useful for me to, you know, just have sort of a guideline as to where to put all of those meshes. So just something really simple and really effective to do. And you probably also noticed that I also needed to go through, and you could also probably see that I had to take all of the foliage that were on the doors and make sure that they followed on the axis on the pivot. And that was really easy. I basically just used, you know, the same pivot that I did before, which was right on the corner of these little wooden pieces. And I used that for the foliage as well. And I did that for the pieces of paper as well. So yeah, not too much to say about that. Everything actually worked out really well. I did want to mention one more time that I looked at the try count for all of this, and you can see we're sitting at just under 100,000. Now I can pretty much confidently tell you that this probably would not work in an actual video game, just because it is super high. Again, this is just a personal project. But, you know, I could talk about that for just a bit. If I actually were to be making this for a game, I basically would need to go through and probably use the original topology that I mentioned before that we had. That would probably bring it down quite a bit. And then I would either retopologize a lot of stuff. And you can see even little things like this, right? If you see like these little golden knobs or soon to be golden knobs, each one of these is sitting at 340 tries, which that is just ridiculous. That's a ton of tries. And what I would probably do is reduce this down to something like 15 or maybe like 30 if I could, just because it's super small. But again, personal portfolio piece, so not super worried. Everything's going to run very smoothly in the engine and with Substance Painter, so not too concerned about that. But that is something that you should keep in mind if you are planning on doing any assets specifically for a game production pipeline. So with all that said, let's go ahead and just jump into Substance Painter and let's get this asset in there. Now I'm only going to be importing the chest and all of its contents. I'm not going to be importing the pages or the foliage just yet. I want to make sure I work on those separately and just kind of go about it one step at a time. Okay, so we are in Substance Painter again, right where we left off. So let's just go ahead and get that new asset imported. And the easiest way to do that is to go up here to Edit. We'll go to Project Configuration, and then we're going to go ahead and select our mesh. So I already have one saved out. It is going to be called the Arcane Chest Complete. Okay, we're just going to hit OK. And now you can see the asset came in just fine. And it doesn't look like there are really any errors associated with this. So I think this is looking pretty good. Just as a blank canvas, it's always kind of fun to see what the asset looks like when it's just, you know, basically black and white. So yeah, overall, I'm actually very happy with this. So in part 2 of this video, I'm going to go ahead and begin to texture this chest, which should be a lot of fun. So I look forward to seeing you in that next video.